The Conservatives have laid out the rules for candidates looking to become the party's next leader, and it ain't cheap. Contenders will have to pony up $200,000 plus an additional $100,000 deposit for good conduct. The total fee is triple the amount candidates had to raise in 2017. In addition, candidates are expected to gather 3,000 signatures from party members, all in by March 25th. Is the party hoping to whittle down the field? David Tarrant is the former Executive Director of Strategic Communications to Ontario Premier Doug Ford, now with Enterprise Canada. And right next to him is Jamie Watt, of course, a Conservative strategist and Executive Chairman of Navigator Limited there in Toronto. Hi, both of you. Nice to see you.
Hey, nice to see you too, Vashi.
Thanks for doing this. Jamie, let me start with you. Before I get into the nitty-gritty of the specific rules, overall, what do you think the change in the rules will accomplish?
I think it will whittle the race down to a few serious contenders, and I think that's a good thing. I think if you watch the debates in America, for example, and you see more people on the stage than in the audience, and no one being able to make a point, and no one really being able to get to know the electorate not being able to get to know them, it's not really a very efficacious process. And I think this process is a clever one. It will whittle the race down, but only in a decent way. And for example, although it's true the total amount due is 3 times what it was before. It's only due in stages, and if you can't raise that over the number of weeks you've got to make that, and if you can't get 3,000 people across the country to say it's a good idea you should run, you know what? You should probably stay at home on your lazy boy with some Pringles and a Diet Coke.
Now, that doesn't sound like a bad life, I'm just saying. But David, what about you? What do you think the change in rules will accomplish?
Well, I broadly agree with Jamie. I mean, at the end of the day, the Conservative Party styles itself, the leader of the Conservative Party is someone who should be credibly viewed as someone who's a candidate to be Prime Minister of Canada. And if you don't look in the mirror and say, I can be Prime Minister of Canada the next 4 years, not padding your resume, not building your profile, not trying to shake up the culture of the party, this should really be about someone who can actually beat the Liberal Party in the next election campaign. And quite frankly, if you're a serious candidate to be Prime Minister of Canada, $300,000 and 3,000 signatures should be quite achievable. The fact of the matter is, I think we saw 14 people running the last time around, and how many of them actually looked in the mirror and said, yeah, you know what, I'm in this to be Prime Minister? Not enough of them. And the less the campaign looks like a sideshow, and the more it looks like a serious race between serious candidates, the better. So I think that a high bar is a good thing. It gives the party clarity and ensures that at the end of the day, the Conservative Party is led by someone who's a serious candidate for Prime Minister.
And David makes a terrific point about being ready in 4 years, but of course, they may have to be ready even less time than that,
could be
which
2.
just actually redoubles the point that he's made about the importance of getting serious, ready-to-go contenders, not ones that have got to go and buy a set of training wheels.
I get that argument completely, Jamie, but I guess I wonder, does it also narrow the field to, is it I get that based on the experience in 2017, when you look at the Democratic slew of candidates, it's a lot and it's sometimes too much to take in, but is some variety a good thing? Is money the best way to determine this?
That's a really interesting question, Vashi, and it's one that really does have to be given some consideration to, because it is a problem, right? Unconscious bias comes into these kinds of things where if you always have rules that are sort of the same, you keep getting the same kind of people, and it probably does exclude some outliers from coming in. But I think given the fact, you have to make a trade-off. And given the fact that we have a minority parliament, given the fact the party is where it is, given what needs to be done in the short term for the party, I'm not sure that some of the other devices you might use to cast a broader net are appropriate at this time. I think where they are appropriate and where the barriers should be lowered is, for example, at candidate recruitment. At the time it comes to recruit the candidates in each of the ridings for the next election, that's where outreach needs to take place. Barriers need to be lowered, supports need to be put in place.
David, I'm sure, like yourself, I remember that 2017 Conservative race very well. It took a long time. There were a lot of candidates. How does the timeline in this instance, the fact that it has to happen in June, as Jamie mentioned, that we're in a minority parliament, how much does that impact the way in which this will all unfold, or should it impact?
Well, the most important part of the timeline, Vashi, is actually the cutoff for new memberships to be able to vote in the campaign. This is a big difference from last time. Quite quite frankly, you go into April and people can still be signed up and vote into leadership, because it changes the dynamics. And I think for folks at home who haven't done these before and haven't worked in these processes before, a leadership campaign is a very different beast than a general election. It goes in phases, and the first phase is really about hitting the ground, trying to sign up as many members as possible. It's really a hardcore organizational push to just move as many memberships as possible. The sooner that phase ends, then it goes into a phase where you're trying to convince current members to make you the second choice. And quite frankly, by pushing the deadline as late as they have, it's really what you'll see is a very weird dynamic, particularly for non-conservatives, where the candidates are entirely focused on membership recruitment for the first 3 or 4 months of the campaign. So it's going to look and sound differently, because the cutoff was much, much earlier last time around.
Do you think it's going to look and sound different too, Jamie?
I do, and I'll tell you one thing about having a relatively short campaign at the end of June. These things are hell for parties, because you know what? We're not used to fighting each other. We're used to fighting other parties. We're used to fighting the Liberals or the New Democrats or the Greens. And now all of a sudden, friends are fighting friends. I was at a big party in Toronto on Friday night, and you could see little cliques not sort of observing each other and watching each other and trying to outmaneuver each other. So the sooner this kind of intramural dispute is over and we can all come back together, the better, because it is difficult and feelings do get hurt and healing does need to take place. So for those reasons, I think it's healthy for it to be swift.
Let me, David, go ahead, sorry.
I say, actually, just to build on what Jamie said, in my experience, the most dysfunctional relationship, the most animosity I've seen in politics, actually are between people who are part of the same party who still have lingering resemblance from a leadership. It actually impacts people's personal relationships, because friendships end. And so, whereas quite frankly, partisan politics is business as usual. And so, quite frankly, a short, ideas-based campaign is certainly in the best interest of the party.
They say there's an expression for that. Your opponent is across the aisle and your enemy is sitting beside you when these things happen.
Yeah, I've heard that a few times here in Ottawa. Jamie, let me just follow up with you and on that concept of coming together, because there's some intricacies to the rules here, especially where the signatures are concerned, that piqued my interest. And it's basically that one of the rules requires that the candidates get signatures from at least 30 different ridings across at least 7 different provinces or territories. What is that an acknowledgement of, Jamie?
Well, I think that's an acknowledgement of the result of the last election. I mean, whoever is going to win this thing is going to have to do better than we did last time around. I mean, it's a cliche for a reason, that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and expecting a different result. And we simply have to do better. For whatever accomplishments we made in the last election, and there were many, they weren't enough. And I think most people would say, if we repeat what we did the last time, we're going to get the same result. So I think one of the things the organizers of the structure of the process are trying to accomplish is to put in motion that idea that if you're serious about being a leader of this party, you have to be serious about being a leader of all of Canada, not just one little specific part.
David, last question to you before we wrap, but there have been over the past about a month and a half, questions around the expenses in Mr. Scheer's office, as well as the agreement made between himself and certain members of the party's leadership to fund his children's education. Does the look into that, it's being audited, part of that, does that have to be wrapped up before this kicks off in earnest? How important is that going forward?
Well, I think it's a challenge for the leadership. For leadership candidates as opposed to for the party. I think, quite frankly, if you look at some of the prospective candidates who are running for leadership, one of the subtle questions they are going to be faced with is, did the Conservative Party, say, underperform the last election because there's structural issues with the party or how it presents its policies or what it represents? Or can you just put all the issues of the party at the doorstep of Andrew Scheer? And that's going to be, I think, a point that's going to be kind of litigated through a number of other issues. Does the party itself need to change, or are these flaws tied specifically to people who were in the last election campaign? That's one of them. I'd say anybody who thinks they can sign up or motivate a large number of Conservative voters, because again, leaderships are a different beast, just by attacking or criticizing the previous leader. That would be an unorthodox strategy, and one I wouldn't have a whole lot of confidence.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there, but thank you very much to both of you. Great discussion this evening. Thanks, Jamie Watt and David Tarrant.
Thank you, Vashi.
The rules are set. The candidates are building their teams. The race is officially on to replace outgoing Conservative leader Andrew Scheer. The Conservatives swept Saskatchewan in all but one seat in Alberta, but the party lost seats in Quebec. What does it need to do to win back some Quebec voters? And why is one prominent Quebec Tory staying out of the race? Michael Fortier is a former senator and served in Stephen Harper's cabinet from 2006 to 2008. He joins us now from Montreal. Hi, Mr. Fortier. Nice to see you.
How are you?
Thanks so much for doing this. I appreciate it. You were, Mr. Fortier, considering a bid, or at least running for the leadership in the Conservative Party. I read the letter that you wrote that was published, but in your own words now, why did you ultimately decide against it?
Well, the short answer is I felt I couldn't win. So a lot of people reached out to me after our defeat. I sort of put this on the back burner. When Mr. Scheer opted to resign, I got a few more calls, which led to more calls. And over the past several weeks, I've been reaching out to people I knew in the party, other people that have since been involved. I've spoken with several MPs, and it appeared to me that although a lot of people would welcome my candidacy, at the end of the day, I think that it would have been difficult for me to win. Simply because, one, I've been away from the party for quite some time since I came back from Ottawa. I've gone back to banking, but also I think some of the views that I have on the environment, on moral issues, and I think in that respect, a lot of people that I was speaking to didn't feel that they were comfortable in supporting me at this stage. And
what specifically are those views that you would have espoused that you were getting the sense wouldn't be resoundingly supported?
Well, I think on the environment, I think we need to be a lot more proactive in terms of tabling compulsory measures to address climate change. We need to continue supporting the Canadian oil industry. That is clear to me. And I think we should have done a lot better as a country. And also here in Quebec, I think a lot more voices should have been heard when Energy East unfortunately failed. And so I believe in supporting the oil industry. But at the same time, I think we need to be realistic about the impact of climate change, not just in Canada, but around the world. And I think what we've been projecting as a party is almost as if we're doubting the science out there, and we can't afford this anymore. Young people care about the environment, and young people really aren't voting for us, although we're an attractive alternative. And I think on moral issues, whether it be abortion rights or same-sex marriage, and we just need to move on and be very clear that we're not going to touch these issues. They've been dealt with, and therefore we need to elect somebody that will be very clear, not vague on this, but very clear in terms of where he or she's going to take the party.
Do you think that person needs to hold a certain set of beliefs or just needs to be clear about what they would do as leader?
No, unfortunately, that's a very good question. And fundamentally, I think that's what sank Mr. Scheer, because he had every right to hold the views he held. But the problem is when you tell Canadians, well, don't worry about my views because I will not act upon them. It doesn't work. Like, you're not running for the president of the Billiards Association. You want to run to be Prime Minister of Canada. So your views and your faith does make a difference. And so I think we actually need to elect somebody who is pro-choice and somebody who will participate in gay pride parades across the country and who's in favor of same-sex marriage. There are other more important issues that we need to deal with as a country, but we keep stumbling on these issues, and that's why we can't get reelected.
How do you square that with the party's base? And I'm asking because we have this discussion with others on the show sometimes, and I'll hear from Conservatives who say, this is a discussion the media wants to have, but it's not one that people who comprise the party are having. And we know that, for example, with Mr. Scheer and other candidates in the last election, there were a number of social conservatives that ultimately buoyed their campaigns. So how do you square the circle?
Well, that's another very good question. I think, I wasn't really involved when Mr. Scheer was elected as leader, and so I think we need to do a much better job in terms of due diligence. Again, I think people have the right to have the views they want to have, but I think it just shocks me just shocks me that a lot of us discovered that Mr. Scheer held those views when we discovered it, like in the middle of the campaign. It doesn't make any sense to me in 2019 and 2020 that this would happen to us. And so we need to flush these issues out, and I think we have a unique opportunity with this leadership campaign to address these issues once and for all, because frankly, there isn't much that keeps us from getting reelected. I know we can. There's so much that unites us as Conservatives, and I find Canadians are willing to give us their vote. But these issues, the environment, and don't forget the environment, because that's very important as well, but the environment and moral issues are stumbling blocks for us, and we absolutely need to square that circle.
Just let me quickly ask you about the environment. Are you in favor of a carbon tax? And if so, will it be too much of a walk back for the party, given the amount of attention they've paid thus far on criticizing the tax?
Well, this campaign, this leadership campaign, will be a wonderful opportunity for all the candidates to table their views. I think a carbon tax is a good idea. If somebody's got a better idea, I'd like to hear about it. But this idea that technology is going to save us, that somebody in a lab in Regina is going to discover the biggest carbon vacuum cleaner that will will ship up in space to absorb all the carbon, is not going to happen. So we need to have solutions now, and people want solutions now, not only because that's the way to win, because that's what we should be doing. That's what I want, that's what my children want, and that's what most of the people I deal with on a daily basis want as well. So let's just stop fighting against the science. It's happening, and try and find real solutions so that we can address this very important problem.
Before I let you go, Mr. Fortier, your name was being bandied about among a number of others. Lots of speculation right now, at least here in Ottawa, about who might end up kicking off a leadership bid. Is there anyone at this stage that you would either already like to endorse or that you would like to enter the race?
Well, listen, I've spoken to several of the potential candidates. I hope we have a lot of folks that enter, because I think our party deserves to have many people enter the fray and bring their ideas. But obviously I will support someone that shares my beliefs primarily on these moral issues and obviously on the environment. So I'll wait and see who runs, and then I'll make up my mind.
Okay, we'll check back in with you then. Thank you, Mr. Fortier. I appreciate your time this evening.
Thank you for having me on.
That was former Conservative Cabinet Minister and Senator Michael Fortier. He was pretty blunt about why he is not jumping into the Tory leadership race. You can hear my full interview with Mr. Fortier coming up in a little bit on this show. But let's start out with Melissa right now. So the response that he gave there at the end was to a question in which he was outlining why he thought the leadership should espouse certain views on moral issues, social issues, whatever you want to call it. And I said, well, can you hold different views as long as you're clear about, how you're going to act as leader? And he basically arrived at the conclusion that no, at the end of the day, because of all the controversy surrounding everything, you should kind of espouse those certain views. Like you should be pro-choice, you should be marching in the parade. What do you think about that?
Yeah, look, I think as Michael Fortier is a member of this party, he's allowed to hold that view of what he wants to see as a Conservative leadership. But it's got to be bigger than that. And I've talked about this on this show. It's got to be about somebody who is ready to be Prime Minister, somebody who looks at the country and says, I have a vision, I have an aspiration to take Canada, to take the Conservatives into the 2020s and actually lead. And stop ceding issues like the environment, like innovation, like immigration to the left, because sometimes around Conservative circles, it's become sort of a faux pas to talk about climate change. And of course, they're going to look for a leader that has Conservative solutions to real world problems. And whether they hold a personal view that is pro-life or pro-choice, it's about what they're going to do for the Canadian people, and not, frankly, for me at least, what they believe personally.
Dan, what do you think about that issue? Can the leader of a party hold certain views personally, but as long as they're clear about how they'll act as leader, continue that way?
Well, I think it's a question as to whether or not you want them to, right? I think it's a question of whether or not in 2020 Conservatives want to pick a leader that doesn't believe in climate change and that it's man-made, that doesn't support a woman's right to choose, that doesn't believe in gay marriage. To put a leader forward,
kind of all different though, just to.
No, I know, but those are three examples of
Right.
social issues that Andrew Scheer ran
Yeah,
afoul
fair
of in the
point.
last campaign. And if they run a leader in this next campaign that has the same views, personally or otherwise, I think it's going to be difficult for them to differentiate themselves from the opinions and perspectives a lot of Canadians seem to have of them. And it kind of looks like they're on that trajectory right now. I mean, if you invested millions and millions of dollars in a state-of-the-art laboratory to build a conservative leader that would be most offensive to swing voters, you'd have wasted a lot of money, because it looks like Pierre Poilievre is already in the race and is going to represent
Zing.
that to a lot
That's
of
not very
Canadians.
nice. But what about Jean Charest? What about Rona Ambrose? I mean, those are Peter MacKay. Those are names that are not synonymous with what you're saying.
Yeah, Rona Ambrose is obviously looming quite large over this race right now. A lot of questions about whether or not she's going to throw her hat in the ring. I think if she doesn't, it will be a pretty stinging indictment of the party's prospects running into the next election.
Matthew, let me ask you a little bit about the other part of this story today, which is that over the weekend, the party released the formal set of rules that candidates will have to comply with. Overall, they're going to have to raise $300,000, and they're going to have to get 3,000 signatures from 30 different ridings and 7 different provinces or territories. What do you think those rules will do to the race?
I think they're a good thing. First of all, I think they're going to save a lot of people from themselves who have perhaps higher opinions of themselves than the electorate does, or even their party members. I think it just creates standards, right? You don't have people dropping off halfway through realizing that they can't raise money, that they have no ground game whatsoever. So I think that that's going to be a good thing for their party, probably a good thing for voters as well, just because, you know, there is a bit of an Americanization of our leadership races here, where we're kind of seeing it being sort of like a pre-game to the general election, where people are trying to get a sense of people, and that's always
Especially now in a minority.
Absolutely, and that's the big challenge, right? Is that you're sort of speaking to the party base, but you also want to talk about electability. I do enjoy hearing senators, former senators, talk about electability. That always tickles me a little bit.
Had to get that NDP dig into the Senate,
I know,
Yeah.
I couldn't resist. But in all honesty, I think they're good rules, and I think it's going to up the quality of the debate. I might not agree with a lot of the things that'll be said, but I think in terms of the abilities of those who will be on the stage, I think that the rules will at least, the party won't feel that it didn't put those parameters in place, even if some do slip through the cracks.
And it should give us a very different race, JP, I don't know what you think, than we saw in 2017. And by that, I mean at the initial, at the start of that race, there were 14 candidates.
Yeah.
Even the night of the election was on and on and on, round. There were a number of people who were very serious contenders, but there were some who were not as well.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the consequence of all this is you won't have people like Andrew Saxton or Deepak O'Brien or Rick Peterson or Chris Alexander, some of the people who ran last time who really had no hope of ever winning, but they just kind of wanted to build profile. They wanted to maybe get a cabinet post if the leader was ever
They might have wanted
elected.
to win, too. It's just that they didn't, based on the polling, they didn't have a chance.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. They obviously all wanted it, or they wouldn't put their name forward. But we're basically going to be able to fit the number of people who are going to be successful at this in a telephone booth, right? Where there's probably only 4 or 5 people maybe who have the ground game to get 3,000 signatures and $300,000 in 72 days by the end of March. I did the math earlier. So that's really short. I mean, more than half the field last time didn't raise $300,000 in a year and a half. Let's not forget that campaign was far longer than this one is going to be. So if they couldn't manage that in that time frame, it's going to be really difficult for people to cough up that much money now. The consequence is it's people who are well organized, people who already have brand name, right out of the gate. Peter MacKay, Jean Charest, Rona Ambrose, the people that we've been talking about for the last number of weeks who already have supporters in the wings waiting to help them get this off the ground. You will not see some of the smaller outfits make it through to March 25th when they have to have all that in place. It's just really, frankly, not possible.
I think it'll say something, too, about a lot of these social issues that keep coming up. If a candidate's running to sort of be the social conservative conscience of the leadership race, how much money can they raise? Can they play within these parameters? Might also be potentially a commentary on where the party's at on those things.
Melissa, what do you think the rules are going to do?
Look, I think the rules actually make that field sort of smaller. It's going to be a different race for a number of reasons. One, for the obvious one, that it's not going to be 14 people on a stage and you trying to decide, which one you hate the least. I think you actually have a small number of contenders that are going to bring forward ideas about, frankly, how conservatives can win the next election and how conservatives look in the 2020s. I also think it's a very different race because we're now into selling memberships. The membership cutoff, and this is really inside baseball, for those watching at home. But the membership cutoff is at the end of April. That means Conservatives can actually build the party and get more members. And the notion of going for somebody's second ballot support, if you will, is entirely different. So the way that we're going to see this race sort of play out, and I'm glad that it's short, because as much as I want to talk,
because you want to talk about this every week, right?
Every week, I think that it's a tough job for a party. It's a tough job for party members to fight against each other for the betterment of the party. And I think the most important thing for the party is at the end of this, that the person who won calls all of the people that lost and makes sure that they're on the same team, so we don't have what happened in the last time happen again.
Yeah. Okay, final word to you, Dan. Quick one, please.
Yeah, I think Melissa makes a great point about selling memberships. Certainly not the best time of year anywhere in this country to have to be out there on the hustings trying to sell as many memberships as you can. And the real question remains is when the leadership vote happens, is the party membership going to look like it does today or like it did in 2019? Or is it going to be built in the image of a leader who is able in this short time period to get out there, sell lots of memberships, and build a new party in his or her own image?
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.